Hello boys and girls. Today we're looking at dividing facts. Yesterday we looked at multiplication, so now today we're looking at dividing. And our learning target for today says I can divide multi-digit numbers. And if you remember that vocab word that we wrote down yesterday, multi-digit, it means more than one number. Again, this icon shows us that we should stop and think about this question that is being asked of us. What is happening when we divide numbers? Yesterday when we multiplied, we learned that multiplying is just repeated addition. So today, dividing is just repeated subtraction. So we're looking at some problems here. We're going to go through long division. This first one we have is 356 divided by 4. So we want to see how many times 4 can fit into 356. So what we do first is we start with this 4 and we ask ourselves, can 4 go into 3? Well, 4 cannot, so now we need to put a 0 up above to say that 4 goes into 3 0 times. Some of you know, without putting a 0, that it will not fit into 3, so you can just leave that part blank. So it doesn't go into 3, so now we look and say, okay, well, how many times does 4 go into 35? Well, 4 can fit into 35 8 times. Okay. Now we take that 8 and we go 8 times 4 equals 32. All right. So that is showing us that 4 can fit into 35 8 times, and it fits in there. It fits 32 in there, and we say, well, how much is left over? So we have to do subtraction. 35 minus 32 equals 3. Okay. Now we have to move over to the 6 in the hundreds place. We bring that down. So we have 36. And again, we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 fit into 36? Well, we know that 4 can fit in there 9 times. Again, we do that multiplication. We say 9 times 4 is 36. Again, we have to see how much is left over. Well, 36 minus 36 is 0, which shows us that there is a remainder of 0. So our answer is 89. Okay? So that tells us that 356 divided by 4 equals 89. This next one here, we are looking at 3,825, and we are dividing it by 9. Again, we start with that 9, say how many times does 9 fit into 3? Well, it can't, so we put a 0 up above. Then we move on to the next one, 38, and we say how many times does 9 fit into 38? Well, we know that that will be 4. Again, we do our multiplication. 4 times 9 equals 36. We have to find out how much is left over. 8 minus 6 is 2. 3 minus 3 is 0. Okay, now we move over into the hundreds place. This 2, we carry it down. Okay, so now we ask ourselves, how many times does 9 fit into 22? Fits in there 2 times. All right, we go 9 times 2, which is 18. Again, we have to see how much is left over. 2 minus 8. Well, we can't take 8 away from 2, so we have to regroup. We turn our 2 into a 1. This becomes 12. 12 minus 8 equals 4. 1 minus 1 is 0. Now we move into this thousands place here, where our 5 is. We drop that all the way down. Okay. Now we ask ourselves, how many times does 9 fit into 45? Well, it fits in there 5 times. 5 times 9 equals 45. 45 minus 45 is 0, so that is how we know when to stop. So our answer for this one is going to be 425. So 3,825 divided by 9 equals 425. This would be a great place to pause. If you think you've got it, try this next one on your own. Otherwise, we will keep going through it here. Okay, we are looking at 648 divided by 12. Okay, so we say 12. How many times does 12 fit into 6? Well, it doesn't, so now we move on to the next part. 64 Okay, how many times does 12 fit into 64? Well, we look at our multiples of 12. We go 12, 20, 24, 36, 48, 60, then the next is 72. Okay, so it fits in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 5 times 12 equals 60. We have to find out how much is left over. 4 minus 0 equals 4. 6 minus 6 is 0. We drop down the 8 in the hundreds place there and say, well, 12, how many times does 12 fit into 48? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times 12 equals 48. Find what we have left over, which is 0. So our answer here, 648 divided by 12, gives us an answer of 54. Okay, here we have, in this red box, you'll see these steps that you can follow. I would suggest writing this down in your notebook. Okay, these are the steps that we are going to follow for long division. So first you divide. Okay, see how many times that number fits in to the first part. Then you multiply. Okay, then step 3 says to subtract. Step 4, we drop down that next digit. And then step 5, we just repeat that process. So I'll go through each of the steps on this example here. Our first one here, 1,856 divided by 32. So we look at the 32. Can 32 fit into 1? Nope. So we move on. Can it fit into 18? It cannot. So now we have to move on to the 5. We ask ourselves, how many times does 32 fit into 185? All right. Now, I do not know this straight off the top of my head, so a little skill that I'm going to use here, I'm going to kind of round my answers and use a little guesstimating. So we look at this 32, and we can round that down to 30. Okay. I'm going to do 185. Okay, that's kind of close to 180. Now if we split this up and we think to ourselves this 30 as just a 3 in the tens place, we know 3 times 5 would be 15, okay, which is pretty close to that 18 in the 185 place there. So if we were to put down a 5 up above, okay, now 32 times 5, we can do what we did yesterday where we learned how to multiply. Okay, and we go 5 times 2 equals 10, regroup our 1. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 1 is 16. So we have 160. We will not be able to fit another 32 in there. That would bring us up to 192. So we have 160. Now we subtract. Okay, so we did step 1, we divided, saw how many times it fit in. Then step 2, we multiplied. Now step 3 is where we subtract. So we take 185 minus 160. So 5 minus 0 equals 5. 8 minus 6 is 2. 1 minus 1 is 0. So now we bring down the 6. Now we have to ask ourselves, so we brought down the next digit. Step 5 says to repeat, so we go back to the top. Now we have to ask ourselves, how many times does 32 fit into 256? Okay. So I'm going to use the same kind of idea that we did before. I'm going to look at this 3, and I'm going to look at 25. Okay, I know that 3 times 8 will get me to 24, so I'm going to try that. 32 times 8. Okay. 8 times 2 equals 16, so we write down our 6, regroup our 1. 8 times 3 is 24, plus 1 equals 25. All right, so it goes in there 8 times. 8 times 32, we just found out, is 256. Okay. Step 3 says that we subtract, and that's 0. There's no next digit to drop down, so our answer here is just 58. All right. So 1,856 divided by 32 gives us an answer of 58. All right, let's try this next one. Again, if you think you've got it, go ahead and pause me. Try this on your own. Otherwise, we will go through it together here. We are looking at 19,092 divided by 74. So we look at that 74. We know it can't fit into 1. It can't fit into 19. So now we move on to 190. All right. 74. Okay. Let's see. How many times can we fit 74 into 190? So I'm going to guess that it's going to be close to 3. So I'm going to try it. 74 times 3. 3 times 4 equals 12. Put down our 2, regroup our 1. 3 times 7 is 21. 21 plus our 1 we regrouped is 22. Okay, now we see that's too many, so that cannot be our answer. All right, so now let's try 2. 74 times 2. Okay, we're going to know that that's it because it can't be 3, so our next one is going to be 2. So I'm going to write down a 2 up above the 0 since we moved on to the hundreds place. Step 2 says we multiply, so 74 times 2, well, 2 times 4 is 8. 7 times 2 is 14. So we have an answer of 148. Again, next step is to subtract. 0 minus 8, we can't take 8 away from 0, so we have to regroup. This becomes an 8. This becomes 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. 8 minus 4 is 4. And now, step 4 says to drop down our next digit, which is a 9. Okay. Now we have to figure out how many times does 74 fit into 429. Well, we saw earlier that 74 times 3 is 222. Okay, so 74, let's try 74 times 5. Okay, we're not exactly sure how many times it fits, so we just have to do some trial and error. Well, 5 times 4 is 20, so we write down our 2, regroup our 2. Sorry, write down our 0, regroup our 2. 5 times 7 is 35, plus the 2 we regrouped, and that's going to be 37. Now, if we were to add another 74 to that, okay, we would have 4. 7 plus 4 is, or 7 plus 7 is 14. 444. So we are going to be over. So our answer is going to be 5. It fits in there 5 times without going over. We found that that equals 370. Okay. Now we do our subtraction again. 9 minus 0 equals 9. 2 minus 7, well, we can't take 7 away from 2, so we have to regroup to 12. Okay. 12 minus 7 is going to be 5. All right. And we have to drop down our next digit, which is our 2. We want to keep this nice and lined up if possible. Now, how many times does 74 fit into 592? Well, we checked 5, got us 370. We added one more, so 74 times 6 gets us 444. Okay, so let's try times 8 to see if this will work. 74 times 8. Well, 8 times 4 is 32. Write down our 2, regroup our 3. 8 times 7 is 56. 56 plus 3 equals 59. All right, so there we go. So we're going to write an 8 up above. 8 times 74, we just found out, is 592. Do that subtraction. Gets us 0. So our final answer then, 258. All right, just one last thing I want to go through here. Sometimes you may see the problem written like this. It's telling you 894 divided by 77. And I think some people get tripped up on what number goes where. All right, so we're going to draw our box here. We need to figure out what number are we dividing and what number are we dividing it by. So when I read this, I read it 894 divided by 77. So that means we're trying to see how many times does 77 fit into 894. Okay, so some people like to think of this as like the doghouse. Okay, and if we read it, how many times does 77 fit into 894? 894, is in the doghouse. Okay, so again on this one, we have 1,098 divided by 65. Okay, so we are seeing how many times does 65 go into the doghouse, 1,098. Okay, so that's our last thing for today. Again, you can always go back and re-watch any part of this video. You will also now go and take the Dividing Facts NICU quiz.